Good afternoon, everyone. It's so great to have you in today's workshop, engaging parents when you don't speak their home language or understand their culture. Given the changing demographics all over the United States, I know that educators now must create culturally and linguistically responsive environments that incorporate families' assets, families' linguistic assets and cultural assets, and really think about their lived experiences. And there are multiple considerations when creating these equitable, fair opportunities to engage diverse families and their children to really address their developmental needs and learning. In this session, we will discuss your ideas, my ideas, everybody's ideas, right? Because everybody comes to workshops with lots of knowledge. We're going to discuss strategies that support and engage diverse families through respectful relationships that lead to reciprocal partnerships. So good afternoon, everyone. So you probably have met my colleague, Dr. Ileana Lanis. I am Dr. Iracema Salinas Gonzalez, and I'm an associate professor of early care and early childhood studies at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. Over the past 35 years, my focus has been on working with young children, in particular, young children whose native language is not English. So I work a lot with families of young dual language learners and their teachers, their educators. So who's joining us today? I saw that several of you were already responding in the chat. So go ahead and include your name and where you work, just so that I can get to know you a little bit better. So I see several of you. I see Malia Edmonds, Sandra Johnson, Michelle. Good afternoon, everyone. April, Feda, Deb, Amy, M. Tanner, Marquise Tanner. So hello, Summer. Very nice. Lots of our participants today. Caitlin, Dawn, Mary, Jamie. So welcome, everyone. So again, today's topic is on engaging parents when you don't speak their home language. So keep adding your name so that we know that you're here today. So these are some of the agreements that you heard earlier today, which are all of us are going to be present. So when we're present, what does that mean? It means that we discuss with our peers, we discuss with a presenter. Sometimes we're going to participate in whole group discussions, and I'll ask you to participate in the chat. Sometimes we're going to engage with your colleagues in breakout rooms. So when we move to that little breakout room, you'll hear me say, join your breakout room. And when you're there, it's time to discuss. So these are the workshop objectives. First of all, understanding the importance of cultural and linguistic responsiveness, right? Responsiveness, what does that mean? That, you know, we're tending to their needs, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that. We're also going to be establishing reciprocal relationships with diverse families, and there's different ways that we can do that. We're also going to be designing equitable opportunities for family engagement. And lastly, we're going to identify strategies. I'm going to share strategies, but together we're also going to brainstorm some strategies that we can use for engaging diverse families. Engaging parents when the teacher does not speak their native language could be a little challenging, right? Or when we don't fully understand their culture can also be challenging. But there's several ways that we can bridge what we call the academic knowledge of the school with the family, linguistic, cultural assets, their lived experience from home, and how to connect those two. So there are several ways to bridge these gaps, and we're going to create a strong, inclusive connection along the way. The key is really to show respect for the parents' language and culture, and actively seek to understand our families and make use of the available resources that foster communication. So here comes the first chat. So I want you to think about this. I want you to visualize an environment or a place where you just feel welcome. You feel positive in there. Your affective filter is just low. You feel comfortable. Remember how you feel when you spend time there? What makes you feel welcome in that place? Let's chat. What words describe the essence of this welcoming environment? So let's start using the chat. Very good. I see smiling, kindness, greetings, connections, acceptance, friendly, be knowledgeable or knowledged, acknowledged, smiles, kindness, acceptance, asking how I feel, acceptance, familiar things, friendly faces, positive energy, friendly, again, calm, smiles, greetings, responsiveness, anywhere where the people are inviting and compassionate. I agree with you, Malia. Seeking a friendly face, right? Sometimes even when we don't understand the language, but we're multimodal, we can read each other's face. Warmth, hello, welcoming diversity, hugs, multicultural environment, positive connection or bond, smiles, positive energy, good vibes. Wow, y'all are including lots of really nice positive words, and all of those are really the key to connecting with our families and connecting with our children, right? Even when we don't speak their language. In early childhood, we always say we're multimodal. Even when we don't speak the language, there's ways, different modalities that we can send a message, right? Early childhood environments can positively or negatively affect how families and their children feel, especially culturally and linguistically diverse families that are experiencing perhaps their first new environment, the school environment outside of home. This is the first time they're sending their children to a school outside their home. Um, and they feel a little concerned, sometimes a little nervous, especially we feel nervous because we don't understand them. But let's see how they also feel nervous because they can understand us. It's a new environment, and then it's a new language that they do not understand, or maybe they understand just a little bit. So, as educators, it is our responsibility to create a classroom space that is safe, secure, relatable, um, very accepting, right? Just like many of you mentioned that. It's warm. Many of you mentioned that. It's warm. It is respectful. It is respectful. Um, and where children feel that there's some familiarity in there, it's comfortable. And a school and your classroom could be such a place. So think about all the different languages, right, that we get to see in our classrooms. And no wonder it is very, very challenging sometimes, right? So, how can we be linguistically responsive when there's so many different languages and so many different cultures that are being represented in my classroom? So these are some of the top languages that we see in classrooms in the United States, in early childhood classrooms in the United States. The language that continues to be at the top of the list in all the states is Spanish. We have a lot of Spanish speakers in our classrooms. So yes, creating a welcoming, supportive environment for cultural, linguistically diverse families is the first strategy for us to use. Just like you said, those warm greetings, just the smile, the nod, right? All of that. So making families feel welcome. And again, we don't have to speak their language, but just being warm with them, greeting them, right? When we say, good morning, how are you feeling? and we use all these multimodal ways, make them feel that they're in the right place. When we say, come in, join us, thank you. So provide necessary support also in the front office, right? We also need our staff to be trained in how to also be smiling and greeting them. And even when you don't speak their language, I teach a class where I have a lot of bilingual students that speak English and Spanish, but I also teach another class at the university where the majority of my students are not Spanish speakers. And on purpose, sometimes I'll start the class in Spanish. And when I ask my students, how did you know what I was talking about? And they said, well, Dr. Gonzalez, you were talking with your body, multimodal. When we say, come in, good morning, so good to have you in class. So we need that not only from the educators, but also the front office staff, because the front office staff are the first people that they get to see, right? Also, when possible, we know that sometimes it's not possible. Having bilingual staff, that helps families feel reassured that their presence and diversity are valued. And when you don't have bilingual staff, just learning little words here and there. And then getting documents translated so that you can know just the basics of greeting other people. I remember when my daughter brought her future in-laws to meet us because they were going to ask for my daughter's hand in marriage. And my son-in-law speaks 4 different languages. His parents speak, his dad speaks 5, English and Spanish, Urdu, some other Pakistani language, and some other Indian language, 5 languages. His mom speaks very little English, does not speak Spanish, and speaks 3 other languages, Urdu, one of them. So I thought, oh my goodness, I need to learn a little bit of Urdu, just basic words. And being that I'm an early childhood educator, I speak with my hands and my eyes. So we were able to engage and communicate effectively. And needless to say, yes, she did get engaged and she got my blessing, and we were able to understand each other. We also need to, like I said, learn a few words in the students' languages. There's a lot of resources online. Or ask parents. However, it is not appropriate to ask children to translate. When we ask children to be the language brokers, that adds extra stress on them. And sometimes that might not translate very effective. And then sometimes parents might get upset. So affirm your family's language with the center's common areas, the schools, the individual classrooms, just having banners and signs in multiple languages, that helps families feel welcome. Have your rules, your procedures in different languages, that helps families feel welcome and understand what is expected in the classroom or at your school or your center. And these are some examples of some classrooms that we've seen, where sometimes they have signs in the hallways, in the main office, at the library, the cafeteria, the restroom, the nurse's office, the water fountain. And then just including functional print so that they'll know this is the entrance, this is the exit, this is where we place our backpacks, this is where we place our sweaters, our coats, and things like that. And then include images with all that functional print, guides parents to find where things are, and also guides children to know where things belong. So just include lots of visuals and text. And I bet several of you are already doing that, because this is one of the things that I see in several schools. So how can we provide that welcoming, supportive environment? There's different ways. We know that families may not initiate or respond to traditional approaches of paper and pencil or electronic surveys or invitations to open house. Or sometimes they might not respond to parent-teacher conferences, right? Because they might not understand what is the purpose of that, or perhaps where they're coming from, that is not something that takes place, right? So these are some ways. First of all, you can use formal and informal ways to reach out and welcome families. Sometimes we send little notes with children. Sometimes we call families, but sometimes we send emails, text. I know a lot of schools have different systems that send messages, but just remember, not all families may respond to those approaches. So you need to just really get to know the family to see which is going to be that one approach that works for them. Also ask families for their preferred means of communication. You know, some of them check email, some of them check phone calls, some of them check text. Some of them use, I've gone to schools where they say, well, we post things on, Facebook or things like that, because that's where they go and check. And other families, they prefer face-to-face interaction. So just remember, not everybody values the use of technology. And then, of course, there's multiple languages that we can use when we use multiple translating platforms, such as Class Dojo, Seesaw, or Remind, to send updates and essential information in parents' preferred language or languages. We also can invite families to observe and participate in their child's learning to understand their school better. When we have families from different cultures, they might not understand the school system, right? That the school system that they're entering might be totally different to the school system that they're used to. For instance, in some schools in Mexico, parents just completely trust teachers. So if they don't take the initiative to be there, is because they just completely trust teachers that what should be going on in their child's education, and they take it very seriously. Whereas in the American way of schooling, we see no, parents need to come and parents need to be here and parents need to be, right? So you see how they're very different, very different. So invite families to observe, and that way they know what to expect, and that way they can start understanding your school, your early childhood center. And then, of course, incorporate their culture, their lived experiences. Find out more about their lived experiences without stereotyping. Children's lived experiences is very different than what goes on in their home country, right? Because now they're part of the United States. So what happens around their community? What are their lived experiences? What are their daily contextualized social linguistic practices? And we use those in our school and program. Helping families feel welcome and respected will build positive relationships. And the more they feel welcome and respected, then they start taking that initiative, are getting to know us. However, we also need to get to know them. And we need to understand that every family has a story, just like every educator has a story, right? And sometimes our stories do not align with the family stories. But again, we have to learn to listen, to get to know them, to understand where they're coming from. Each family has their story. So their personal and family stories influence how they view the world and those around them, right? It's not until we start understanding that, oh, this is what they've experienced, no wonder they don't come to school. And I'll share an example. In my family, my mom was always very involved in my education, but I did notice that my dad didn't. get involved in my education. He would always say, just ask your mom. But the more I got to talk to my dad, I realized that he had had a negative experience with education in South Texas. My dad is not from Mexico. His parents are not from Mexico. His great grandparents are not from Mexico. On my dad's side of the family, we've been here in South Texas for 5 generations, right? Because Texas was Mexico. But Spanish was always part of his home language. Yet when he went to school, he was punished. He was spanked. Sometimes he had to stand in front of a chalkboard with gum on his nose, facing the nose. So guess what? That is his story. So that story influenced his inability to get involved in his children's education because he just saw it as, oh, it's something negative. It's just for children. I'm not going to get involved. My mom went to school in Mexico, so she had a very positive school experience. So when she came to the United States, of course, she wanted to be involved. So the point here is that not all families are the same, right? So we can't group all of these families are Indian, they speak Urdu, and therefore they're this way. All of these families are Hispanic, they speak Spanish, and therefore they're this way. All of these families are from the German culture, and therefore they're this way. It doesn't work that way. As educators, we really have got to pay more attention, listen to families, see them for who they are. And the more we do that, we start building a relationship by learning about their stories and their strengths. Notice that I didn't say weaknesses. Focus on their strengths. What are their strengths? And learning from their story helps us know what is important to them. And this is what's going to inform our interactions with them. So these are some examples of things that I've seen in some schools. They do family history projects. And then you get to see that all the projects are very different because every family is unique. This is another project where we had 5-year-olds describing their grandmothers. So all grandmothers are different. We use a lot of family pictures in the writing center so that children want to write about things that they've experienced. It is very unfair to ask children to write about a family vacation if they've never taken a family vacation, right? But if you ask them to contribute pictures that relate to their lived experiences, right? We're affirming their assets, and then that motivates them to write. This is a 4-year-old writing about his grandfather. We also need to acknowledge that families have fears and anxiety, right? They have additional challenges of not understanding the language, the English language. They lack familiarity with the US school system. And they don't know the teacher's expectations. So we've got to listen. And the more we do that, we reassure families that oracy and literacy activities with children in their home language will promote a strong linguistic foundation in their home language. Sometimes families stop using their native language, thinking that they're going to get their children confused. But now we know that there's plenty of research that says don't take their linguistic assets. Their linguistic assets, regardless of that language, is foundation. When we take away that native language, then we're starting with a flat bottom, no foundation. So the foundation, whether it be Urdu, Spanish, Tagalog, Vietnamese, Chinese, whatever that foundation, that linguistic foundation is so important because that's going to help them learn the English. We also provide families with information about the time needed to develop a second or third language so that they won't feel that, oh my goodness, I've been here at school already for 6 months and my child is not speaking English. And we're going to say, you have a normal child. It takes a long time for children to develop a second language. Let's see. Go ahead and include it in the chat. How long do you think it takes children to develop their English, their second language? Go ahead and include it in the chat. How long do you think it takes? Some of you say 3 to 5 years, 1 year, 7 years to be proficient, 18 months, 2 years. Right? So the answer is going to say it varies depending on the child. But the average, it tells us that children usually develop BICS, their basic interpersonal communication skills, which is just good morning, hello, teacher, yes, no. They develop that one pretty soon, right? Probably within the first, 1 to 2 years, they've developed, again, basic interpersonal communication skills. However, academic language takes at least 5 to 7 years. 5 to 7 years. So that if you have children or families that don't answer us in English, it's normal. It's normal because it's going to take them, several years before they start to feel comfortable, right? Also find out how each family comforts their children and do not hesitate to show affection. And we also need to recognize families' cultural linguistic expertise by asking them questions, right? Families should continue to build their children's home language through storytelling, book sharing, songs. I remember seeing a lot of families who did not read to their children because in some countries, usually it's the teacher that reads to children. In some countries, however, they use a lot of storytelling. They sit and they just share stories. Well, guess what? Just storytelling develops oracy, listening and speaking. And that is a precursor for later on reading and writing, right? So let them use songs, let them use storytelling, let them use whatever they're used to using at home. So we've got to recognize families' cultural and linguistic expertise. They have different ways of doing literacy and also doing oracy. So let's chat. How do you create a welcoming environment for your classroom's linguistic and culturally diverse families? Go ahead and include it in the chat. How do you create a welcoming environment for your classrooms, linguistically and culturally diverse families that have so many different lived experiences? Very nice. Ensure that classes have nice things labeled in both languages or 3 languages, depending on the languages that you're serving, right? Think about the children that you're serving and the languages that are there. Family photos are always a big deal for all children, from infants, toddlers, preschoolers, school-age children. Visuals, family artifacts. Yeah, so food, right? Such as bread and rice. Somebody says we have an amazing multicultural team who comes from many different backgrounds. Using labels. using translations, pictures, welcoming, asking families to bring things from home, labeling. Oh, yes, I've actually seen those cultural party potlucks. Beautiful. Decorating the classroom so that families see themselves. Having interpreters, and I think most school districts are doing a really good job in the United States in finding interpreters. Yes, and sometimes it's a little challenging, right? When you have 20 different home languages with a center with only 32 children enrolled. Yeah, that's a big challenge. And this is when you start looking at, okay, I'm going to add visuals. Visuals everywhere. We all recognize pictures, whether it's a picture of backpack, a picture of a book, a picture of a chair, a picture, all visuals always help. Yes, Tanya suggested environmental print. Very good ideas. Posters, Google Translate, different languages in the classroom, right? So we also establish another strategies to establish reciprocal relationships with all families, not just some families. So diverse families may not initiate or respond to traditional approaches, right? Like we said earlier. So we have to really think about, oh my goodness, how am I going to create this reciprocal relationship with all families? So the first thing is to really learn about and honor each family's child reading values, languages, and culture. Families have different ways of raising their children. Families have different ways of communicating with their children. Family have different ways of reading to their children. Families have different ways of including their children. In some families, they include children in the adult discussions. In other families, they separate each other. Children are outside playing, running around. Adults are inside, or vice versa. So we really got to learn about what are some of the values, the languages, the culture from each family. And again, that only happens if we're very, very observant, listen, and drawings. Young children tell us so much about home through their drawings. I remember many years ago working with 5-year-olds, and this particular child lived in an inner city and was drawing. And when the child finished the drawing, I kind of could tell that there was tape on the characters on that drawing. So I asked him, Miguel, what can you tell me about your drawing? And then, of course, Miguel started with a story. Last night, someone broke into the home and they tied us up and put tape on my mom and dad. And so I continued asking him, where were you? Oh, they sent my sisters and I to the other room, but we could hear they were yelling. So drawings also tell us a lot about what's going at home. And as educators, we have to be very careful not to assume that we know what the children are drawing. So we always start with, what can you tell me about your drawing? Instead of, I see. Work with families, identify common goals. Ask families, how would they like to be involved? Ask families what supports may be helpful for them. Families may be facing challenges such as immigration status, their work schedule, childcare, transportation. So find out, and many times we tend to just assume that parents are not showing up to meetings because they don't care. But it might just be that they don't have childcare or that they don't have transportation. Or nowadays, they're just afraid of going out. I'll share with you a little story. My daughter is a second-year medical resident doctor in Chicago. And she did say, she says, Mom, one of my uh, parents, or one of my parents whose child I see, asked if I could write a letter because her husband, although he's a US citizen, was picked up by ICE. So that has really affected the child, that the child now doesn't want to go to school, doesn't want the family to go out, not even to the grocery store, and so forth, right? So we have to ask families, just talk to them, listen to them, because there might be things going on at home that you get to see in the classroom. And there might be things going on in their lives, and maybe perhaps that's why they don't come to the classroom. So learn about the families, their language customs, the activities. In some cultures, they don't play with food. In the United States, we play with beans, with rice, with all kinds of things, right? But in some cultures, that's just not acceptable. So those are things that we need to find out. Be open to multiple and just different forms of engagement, right? And be responsive and support them. And then communicate the value of being multilingual to all families, that there's a social and there's also a cognitive benefit. Yes, we want their children to learn English. We want them to navigate schools in the American schooling, but we also want them to understand that what they bring is an asset that's going to be used to form a bridge. We want them to form a bridge, right? Between this is what I know, this is what I want to know. And your language and your culture helps form that bridge. So again, recognize diversity. Look at all these images, so much diverse. Some families like to, if you look at the picture on the way bottom over here, the one I'm pointing, some families like to actually be in your classroom. They come and help you decorate and hang things. Other families might say, no, I'll go ahead and send some food. I'll cook for you. Other families say, well, I'm, I'm actually educated in my country. I can come and help you. I might just not know English, but I can come and maybe facilitate and monitor. So know that there's diversity in families, but always have high expectations for all family involvement. But the involvement is going to be looking very, very different. So families who did not attend school in the United States may not be aware of the expectations that we have for family involvement in the classrooms in the United States. Um, some may be willing to offer their expertise, other ones might not. Think about my dad. My dad did go to the schools in the United States, but his experiences were very negative. So he didn't want to volunteer. He would send my mom. So support families' decisions as to how they engage. Family involvement is going to be very, very different. We also need to recognize that there's cultural differences. Look at all the cultural differences that we have. So the ways adults ask children to comply varies, right? Some families might be very explicit, put the blocks on the shelf. In other families, we use indirect comments. The show would look very nice, or it looks very nice when the blocks are all in place. So we need to think about that too. So sometimes we might engage with families and we think, gosh, that family is using such strong language, or so direct, so demanding. And sometimes it's just that it's cultural. In the United States, many times we tend to ask a question, right? Would you like to do this? And that's a little more indirect. So feelings of comfort or discomfort when near others, right? In some cultures, it's okay to be near. In other cultures, it's just not appropriate. The way adults nurture children, it's also different, right? In some cultures, we nurture children being talkative. In other cultures, being quiet is seen as a strength, right? In the United States, we see children that are talkative. Just this past week, one of my student teachers said, "Oh, this child is so smart." And I said, "Really?" I said, "How do you know that? You've only been here one day. What did you see that demonstrates that that child is smart?" And my student said, "Oh, because he talks a lot." And I said, "Well, but does he know addition? Does he know subtraction? Does he know the difference between a synonym and an antonym? Does he know the difference between erosion? Does he know the difference?" And she was like, "Well, I haven't seen that yet." And I said, "Then we have a child that's just very talkative," right? So cultures see certain strengths very differently. And different cultures, different parents nurture different things. Whether adults promote autonomy, self-reliance, initiative, or collective interdependence, communal goals, and collaboration, they're all important, right? They're all important. In some families, we nurture dress by yourself, feed yourself. You're already 3 years of age, 2 years of age, 4 years of age. Feed yourself. In other cultures, and I've seen it because I've observed I do a lot of my research is in preschool classrooms, and I go to preschool classrooms where the teachers might be frustrated because they might have a 3 or a 4-year old that kind of waits for the teacher to open the milk or open the juice. And then you turn around and another other children are just there trying to open things on their own. Again, doesn't say to me that this one is more smarter than this one. It just says that in this child's culture, we depend on adults. In the other culture, we don't. So again, be very, very careful not to label parents as weak, but rather get to understand that there's cultural differences. In some cultures, we really do a lot of collaboration, and that's one of our focuses, right? So the way adults encourage emotional expression, just display our emotions or emotional privacy is also very different, right? In some families, you display your emotions. I'm upset. I'm very sad and you cry, right? I'm very happy and you say it. In other families, we might be suffering in silence, or you might be upset, but you don't say it, right? Um, you just had a death in the family and you just don't say it. So know that there's different ways of families with dealing with experiences and expressing their emotions. So the key really is to closely consult with families. That is just so important. It is vital so that we can then start bridging the potential cultural disconnects that might exist between our early childhood centers or our schools or our programs and the families. Okay, so go ahead and get to your chat, your phone, or your laptop. What steps have you taken to get to know your families and the communities where they live? Go ahead and include it in the chat. Very nice. Home visits. Very good idea. Visit their communities. And sometimes you just have to drive around where they live so that you can get to see what's around their community. Get to know their holidays, parent conferences, home visits, questionnaires, the coffee talks. I've also had those, like earlier, somebody mentioned having the potlucks really encourages families to talk. And then also it creates a system where they can meet other families. Home visits, involving parents in read alouds, meeting with families. So what steps have you taken to get to know your families? So a lot of home visits, very good. Inviting them to share something about their culture. And it's so important to invite them to share. That way we don't group people. I remember when so this is my 36th year in education, but many, many, many years ago, I was a kindergarten teacher working with 5-year-olds for the Houston Independent School District, the biggest school district with the most languages in the whole state of Texas, over 200 and some languages. And I remember that other teachers would say, well, aren't you going to do something? It's almost December. Maybe you can do something with tamales because, that's kind of also part of your culture. And since you're working with a lot of Hispanics. And that's when I told her, I said, well, just because I'm Hispanic doesn't necessarily mean that I make tamales or that tamales are part of my culture. So we have to be very careful, right? So it's really getting to know your families. Surveys, questionnaires. Loteria, I love that one. I grew up with Loteria. Meets and greets. Some of you have open houses, very good. The parent surveys, and when they don't, remember, not all families are going to respond to the parent survey, then we have to think of other ways. During pickup and drop off, we know a lot about families, right? Just remember to avoid blaming families for not showing up to school events. Avoid assuming that you know what's best for families. Avoid assuming that you know what's best for their child, right? Because every family has their own goals. And just mislabel families as uncaring when they don't participate. And then gather input from them, just like many of you said, about surveys, pick up, drop off, talking to them, and just finding what are their wishes for their children, and then collaborate so that when you're planning events and you're saying we're celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month, we're saying we're celebrating, whatever you're celebrating is really getting to know from families. Another strategy is to incorporate families' cultures and languages into the curriculum, encouraging programs to include, like you said, books, activities, materials that reflect the cultural and linguistic backgrounds of children and their families, and then that celebrate their cultural holidays and traditions, helps children feel seen and supported while engaging parents in school activities. I remember that I got super excited and I thought, oh my gosh, this book is wonderful. India on a Plate. So when I shared it with my son-in-law, Arsalan, and he started reading it, he's like, oh yes, I've had jalfrezi. And it's curry made with meat or fish, and and you can add veggies, and it's a little tangy dish. But what I liked about this is that the pictures were children in the United States. They're not stereotypical. And that's why he liked it. I've seen other books such as this one, Mango, Abuela, and Me. So I always look for books that have an award because that means that they're authentic. Like this one has the Pura Pelpre Honor Award. And it talks about not a stereotypical grandma, but a grandma here in the United States with a granddaughter and their experience with a bird, with a parrot. And I know when I got that book, I thought, oh my gosh, I can relate to that because my grandmother and my mother they've always had parrots. So now we're going to put you in a breakout room. And in your breakout room, I want you to talk about these three. So take a picture so that you stay very focused in your breakout room. In your breakout room, you're going to talk about what is culture. The second thing you're going to talk about is how do you include your family's culture, so the families that you serve in your program, their culture and language in the curriculum that you have. Because unfortunately, most of us get a curriculum that is packaged in another state or in another city that does not know the children in Illinois, that might not know the children in Texas, might not know the children in Florida. So we have to tweak it, right? So how do you include your family's culture and language in the curriculum? And then the third thing I want you to talk about in your breakout room is why is it relevant to family engagement? So I'm going to give you a few minutes and then I'm going to randomly select one of the breakout rooms, a couple of the breakout rooms to share. So let's go ahead and join the breakout room. Welcome back. Welcome back. I see everybody's almost back. Very good. So who would like to share? What did y'all talk about in your breakout room? Is April raising her hand? April, I saw you like really eager. I said, okay, we got to choose April. Who would like to share? Just what did y'all talk about in your breakout room?
Oh, I accidentally came off mute, so I guess I'll share.
Yes, go ahead and unmute and share, please.
So like traditions, beliefs, ways of life of different people, different celebrations, customs,
Yeah,
languages.
all of that, right? And each one of us, whether we were born in the United States or in another country, or our parents were born in another country, or they were born in the United States, we all have culture, right? We all have culture because we all have customs and languages and values and beliefs, right? Achievements, right? We all have that, regardless of where we're coming from, regardless from what state. We all have culture because we all have lived experiences. And students' culture and lived experiences influence how they understand and make sense of the world around them and how they make sense for themselves, of themselves too, as they are an integral part of who they are as learners. So my experiences growing up with three brothers influences me in that my brothers, I always played with them. So they tend to empower me. My mom was always very empowering, like, women can do anything and women. So guess what? That is part of my culture. So, and then my daughter is the same way, right? Because that's part of my culture. However, I also need to respect that in other families, it's not like that. And it doesn't mean that they're less than, it's just that it's not like that, right? So it's that respect for others, that tolerance for others, and understanding that It's part of everyone's lived experiences, that everybody comes from different contextualized social linguistic practices, and that is relevant to family engagement, right? So this is everything that you just shared with me, right? Everything that you said. It's an integral part of who families are and who children are. So in some cultures, um, mom brings a bag of cookies and we're like, okay, I'm just going to eat two. In other families, mom brings a bag of cookies and they're like, I'm going to wait to eat it till after I have lunch. In other family cultures is, oh, I'm going to eat my cookie before lunch, right? It's just differences. So we have to use caution. We have to be very careful. And that we need to also check our attitudes, our beliefs, our biases, our assumptions about families. Because when we don't do that, then that can result in equitable policies or equitable practices with the families that we're serving, or equitable conditions that we provide our families. For instance, I was working with a teacher. So a lot of my research is with dual language learners, English and Spanish speakers in preschool and kindergarten, and how they learn through play. So as I was researching this particular teacher and I asked about play, she knew everything about play, but when I asked her about how often she incorporates play into the curriculum, she said, "Oh, not with this group." And I said, "What do you mean not with this group?" "No, because I got to help them learn English first." So you see how that person has not checked her attitudes, her beliefs, her biases, her assumptions. So whether a child speaks Urdu, Vietnamese, Spanish as their native language, English their second language, it doesn't matter what their language is, right? Play is good for all children. So we have to always consider our own biases and the messages we send children. And therefore, when I would go and collect research in that classroom, children really wouldn't get opportunities for playing, because in her classroom, 99% of the children in the classroom were Spanish speakers that were learning English. Yes, Miriam, biases can negatively impact the school experience for children and for parents, right? And especially at a young age. And then all children have the right to play. That's what I said, Carolyn. It's like their own language in itself, but yet that happens in a lot of classrooms. And boy, I visited a lot of classrooms from all the way to Washington State, New York, all the way California, all the way to South Texas. And it's always the same thing, is that when we have, especially when we have uh, minority groups that are also living in poverty, then we become even more biased and more stereotypical. So we have to really use caution. All families want what's best for them. So throughout this session, you probably noticed that there's a strong commitment to families' cultural linguistic capital. I keep saying cultural asset, linguistic asset, right? When we refer to capital, we use Yoso's community cultural wealth framework to indicate families' talents, their strengths, their experiences that students of color bring with them to the classroom. And as we develop our classroom environment, we want to engage all families, regardless of their culture, regardless of their language, regardless of their, you know, any difference that they might bring. So engage them in meaningful dialogues, encourage that learning experiences are meaningful, relevant, and respectful. again, eliminate stereotypical or inaccurate materials, because I still walk into a lot of classrooms where they have mariachi hats. And I keep saying, in my culture, I'm a fifth generation Mexican American. And in my culture, mariachi, we use it only for, I don't know, a party, a special occasion, but it's not part of my daily lived experiences. So I actually get offended. So display images that accurately reflect families' lives during work, recreational activities, and emphasize that families' language and cultures are strengths that should be used daily. When you create games, when you create those read aloud sessions, when you create writing prompts, anything with cooking, think about their assets, their strengths. We also include families when adapting learning materials. So encourage families to bring materials from home. Many of you said pictures, artifacts, food when appropriate. I know that I've gone to some Head Start classrooms where they say, well, we're not allowed to bring food. So when appropriate. Audio record families reading books in their native languages. So ask them to do that at home and send them to the classroom. At the same time, we also need to be considerate that we will have families that are illiterate, but they can also help us in other ways. You can also include families' oral narratives. In some cultures, like the Native American cultures of New Mexico, they believe in oral narratives and storytelling, and they sit down and just tell stories, and children's listening skills are really, really strong because that's part of their culture. And then create books representing families and children's experiences. So sometimes we might not find the exact book that we want, but we can create those books. Look at all these materials. All of these are culturally relevant to some families while not relevant to others. You know, using dominoes. In some families, they like to play that. Collecting buttons. In some families, collect buttons. How many of you remember? Maybe your family's collecting buttons. And just so long as they're big, not too small, you can use them to make games. Playing bingos, loterias, maracas. What other materials do your students have at home? Go ahead and include it in the chat. What other materials do your students have at home that you could use in your classroom? So go ahead and share it in the chat, because there's so much academic, math, language with all of these things. Dolls, very good. Food containers, different kinds of dishes, lots of books, right? Packages, yes, I love to use packaging from different types of food. As a matter of fact, I actually created a whole alphabet by asking families to contribute packaging from different types of foods. So equitable environments for children are both culturally and linguistic responsive. So when we think responsive is that we're responding to their needs, right? And look at all the different ways that we can do that. The schedules, the routines that we create. Children whose native language is not English, they need a predictable routine so that they know what's coming up. So they'll know that, oops, every time the teacher starts singing, let's clean up, everybody, let's clean up. And then they see the teacher putting things in their place. They're like, oh, that's what she means. Vamos a recoger el salón de clase. So there needs to be a predictable schedule, a predictable routine. And in early childhood, we use songs instead of ringing bells and turning off lights. That's a little bit scary and intimidating. We also use family pictures. We create alphabets with what's important to them instead of start, with Q for queen. Well, let's think of other things that start with the letter Q that is relevant to their community. And we used empty food boxes. And of course, we asked families to share some of the books and toys and props and songs and dances from their community, their culture, their poems. There's so many poems and rhymes in everyone's culture. Right now in the chat, I want you to include a rhyme that you remember that your family used growing up. Go ahead and include that in the chat. So think about a rhyme that you remember. Some of you grew up with Humpty Dumpty. Some of you grew up with This Little Piggy. Some of you grew up with Jack and Jill. Rocio, I can relate to you. I grew up with De Colores. Miriam, can you tell us about your particular song?
So it was a song that I learned from a very close friend. She had come from the Middle East, and so we didn't speak Arabic. She only spoke Arabic, and she came and she was teaching us. It was like a hand game, and it was this salam, 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 and it's Hayat al-Islam, didin, 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 elo, elo, elo. So it's just a song of all the different greetings in Arabic, and that's how we learned all these things. And we would go to my mom and we would ask her, "Oh, what does this mean? What does this mean?" And my mom would translate for us. And so we continuously played that song because it made her feel very inclusive and she liked it. And we learned it. And then my kids sing it now because I passed it on to them.
That is beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And just like you shared that particular rhyme and song, right? There's a lot of them. Actually, there's a lot of similar rhymes and songs in different languages. I think most of us put some that were in English. I saw some in Spanish, and that's why I asked Miriam to share because that was a different one. But there's like the 10 elefantitos. There's the 10 little elephants, right?
For me, it was sana, sana colita de rana, sana hoy, no sana mañana.
Karina, thank you for sharing that. So, and when would they sing or chant that one?
Oh, whenever you like got hurt and you got an owie and you're crying, they basically sing it like it's basically saying like make the pain go away, it'll go away. If it doesn't go away today, it'll go away tomorrow.
Yes, that you're gonna be all right, right? I can relate to that because my grandmother used to sing that one every time, we would get hurt. And I remember that when I was a kindergarten teacher and a preschool teacher, and I would share that one with my students, they would say, "Oh, my grandmother uses that also," or "Oh, I've heard that one." So there's that connection. So get to know more from your families to see if there's any special rhymes or songs that they use. So using resources from home in the community is important to develop children's language and literacy. So again, create family albums, bring in family photographs, community photographs. Ask families to drive around their community or walk around their community, take pictures of their community. And that's how we start teaching the alphabet, with what they see on a daily basis, what they live on a daily basis. And then, of course, family objects. So these are some. You're going to see that I shared several extra slides in here just so that you can see some examples of some of the games that I've seen teachers create. They create puzzles. This particular Head Start teacher had migrant families. So she asked the migrant families to bring in pictures from the work that they do. And of course, this is a picture of one of the fathers working in the pumpkin farms of Colorado. So, and the children would see these puzzles. And I remember when I went and I was looking, they would say, "Mira, look, this is where Tom's dad works. Or look, 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 this is where Mariana's mom works. And they would just get excited and they wanted to talk about it. Remember, in early childhood, it's encouraging to use their language, whatever language they have. They use what we call language of learning. Remember that. Children use language of learning. The language of learning is the one they bring from home. We as teachers use the language of teaching. So when they get excited and they're sharing the pumpkin and I'm like, oh, yay. Then I start saying, yes, I noticed that. I see the pumpkins. That's a lot of pumpkins that your dad picked up or that your dad harvested. So then the children start getting motivated to learn the English because you're using what connects to home, right? There's that cultural relevant materials. And we use them not only to create games and to decorate, but also to place them at their learning center so that they can play with them on a daily basis and be engaged in talking. Look at the children here. This was that Head Start classroom. And they were just excited to talk. And especially the little boy with the blue sleeves. He was not much of a talker, but with this particular game, man, he would just light up. This is another teacher also using familial pictures, and they actually brought pictures from home. These are 3- and 4-year-olds in a mixed aged classroom where the teacher asked them to bring pictures. And so one of the games were, it says Familia de Bea. So Bea is looking at all those pictures, putting them in order. Sometimes she would ask them to bring pictures that they could use in sequencing games. So they would use those. So as teachers, as educators, it's important for us to support parent-child learning opportunities at home too, right? So sometimes we ask them to bring things, but sometimes we can also send things home. Look at this one. For this one, we ask families to bring something from home. So every Friday, the teacher would ask a different family to bring an object. So let's see if I put something in that box. So she had this box. She labeled it as la caja sorpresa, or in English, the mystery box. So there's something in there. So I'm going to give you a clue, okay? Let's see if y'all can guess. Use the chat. I'm touching something hard and black. What do you think I'm touching? So everybody go ahead and use your chat. A remote control. I love that one, Cole. Okay. A cell phone. Okay. I'm going to give you another one. Thank you for using your culture, your lived experience to respond to this. How about if I give you another clue? It's shaped round and concave. What do you think? A domino, a rock, a bowl. Let me give you another clue. I use it to grind spices, seeds, herbs. What do you think it is? A mortar and a pestle. Yes, it's a mortar and a pestle. Molcajete o tejolote. Depending on where from Mexico you come, your family comes, it's named differently. My mom calls it a molcajete. We can also create story boxes like this one. Oops. So this particular teacher also used the box and again, families would bring different artifacts. The children would put them in the box and they would just draw stories or write stories. In this case, they were scribbling stories. So think about what your families can offer. So how are you engaging in meaningful dialogue? So continue thinking about that so that I've given you several ways of engaging in dialogue, but continue doing that. And when one strategy doesn't work, then look for another strategy, right? And always high expectations. There's no such thing as, I asked them to bring an artifact from home. I emailed them and they're not going to bring it. Well, no, some people don't check their emails, right? But some people, if you give them a call, your home visit, right? Or send the note in the child's backpack. So there's different ways of engaging them. Several of you said using the labels from home, right? They're meaningful, they're relevant, and they can provide many learning opportunities for all children, right? Children have seen these at home, but they might not know that those are the letters, what the name of each one of those letters are. So that's a way of you teaching with what they have from home. This is an example of another classroom where the teacher, again, asked them to bring images from home, and she created an alphabet with children. We call this a student-generated alphabet instead of having a store-bought one. So what can we do with familiar labels? So many things. Place them on the word wall. Instead of starting the word wall with words that don't connect with us, start with words that connect with us. Make a class book about the family, the different foods that they eat at home. Create a collage on a bulletin board that says from A to Z, labels from home. You can create games. You can create games where you can say, okay, let's classify these labels, things that are found in the kitchen, things that are found in the restroom, things that are found in my bedroom. And you're going to, this game, we actually played it with some children. And we were surprised that what we thought belonged in the kitchen sometimes belonged in the restroom. What we thought belonged in the restroom belonged in their bedroom, again, because families have different ways of doing things. Creating bingo games. So again, just involving children, families, and the community in designing and implementing learning activities is important so that families see themselves. They also start seeing themselves as capable learners. They start seeing themselves as being respected in the classroom. And when families see themselves respected, they're going to start offering themselves. Let me share with you an example of when I was a kindergarten teacher in inner city Houston. I was raised in the country. So my home had 5 acres of land in South Texas. I had horses and I could run around all day. But when I started teaching, I moved into the inner city. And boy, I started learning that things are very different and that there's so many varieties of families and cultures, right? So I started, again, inquiring, getting to know families. And I started using what families see in different ways, because that supports children in the classroom. So in here, I included many other examples that you can take home, such as the functional signs. Earlier, we talked about labeling everything in your classroom. So if you have a label on the shelf with an image and then the basket has something in there, the children will figure it out. They'll say, oh, in here it says plastilina, or the teacher says Play-Doh. And then and then pretty soon you'll start noticing that teachers will ask you, what does it say, teacher? And that's when you start reading the room with them. And it's very important that we label with children, that we just don't label and never refer to them. But we want to read the room with them. You say, today we're going to read everything that's in the math center, or everything that's in the table games, or everything that's in the science center. And the more we start referring to everything that's labeled, then children will start showing interest as well. Look at this one. I took a picture of this one because when I first saw it, I wasn't sure who this was. P, peso pluma, who knows? In the chat, who knows who this person is? Anybody? So some of you may know, right? Because maybe you've seen or heard his music, right? Or you know he's an artist. I remember when I first visited this kindergarten, this 5-year-old classroom, first I told the teacher, I love the idea of children drawing what they see as important for each letter instead of buying one or having one that was commercially made in another country or in another state. But then I asked the children, so what can you tell me about Peso Pluma? My goodness, these 5-year-olds could just tell me everything about it. Of course, later on, when I talked to my adult children about this artist, they looked at me and said, Mom, you don't know who that is? And I was like, well, no, I guess it's part of music that's for the younger generation. So really get to know your families. This is the other example I shared earlier. So Karachi cookies. Or think about for the CH, chocolate abuelita, or the A, abuelita. Think about what's relevant to them, right? When we use children's funds of knowledge, it motivates language. It motivates diverse families to use language, and it motivates them to get involved. And it's also authentic learning. So this is the example with abuelita. So remember again, each family has their story. And we also know that we have a story. So our story is important, but it does influence us how we think. And it does influence us how we process information and how we react to certain situations, experiences, and events. So we've got to reflect on our strengths and also those that concern us as we prepare interactions with families. Okay. So for homework, I want you to take a picture of this one because this is your homework. What are the strengths of the families in your school, in your center, in your community? What are their strengths? Maybe some of your families are very good at building. Math is their strength. Maybe you have families that enjoy singing. Maybe you have families that enjoy sending things. You know, what are some of their strengths? What is their cultural wealth? So really get to know them, get to understand them. That is your homework. So the point here is that we've got to partner with families. We can't just see a child and say, oh, this is their funds of knowledge. It's going to take us weeks to get to know their funds of knowledge. The more we interact, the more we engage, the more we listen, the more we involve them. We get to know their funds of knowledge. And we get to understand the way they do things. And sometimes the way they do things might be similar to the way we as teachers do things. And sometimes it might be very, very different, right? But we do have to respect families' capital, right? They all come from different cultural capital, whether they're farmers, they're bakers, they work at a restaurant, whether they work as teachers, whether they work in a big company, in a small company. All families have strengths, skills, and experiences that they can share with us in the classroom. So again, make time to learn about them. So take an assets-based approach. Provide access to the dominant practices while sustaining home and community practices. Because the way we get to those dominant practices, which we do want all children to learn the American culture, the English language, we've got to sustain their home and community practices, because that's how we create that bridge. We understand that home and community culture are resources to honor, explore, and extend, but that happens only when we have those interactions with them. The opposite is when we start seeing families as they don't get involved, or I give them a call and they don't come. We'll find out why. There's more to it. Culture responsive classrooms encourage students to draw on their prior knowledge, their cultural experiences, and to make connections to the academic content. So we include books and games and labels in different cultures and languages. And we also involve families to come and share some of their expertise. There's also people in the community that can come and share their expertise. And just remember that there's multiple perspectives when discussing any type of event. Look at all the different books where children can see themselves. We all are welcome. Festival of Colors. What can you do with a paleta? Right? The proudest blue. Hello in different languages. The kindest red. So again, life experiences serve as a source for learning. Listen to children's everyday talk to learn about the places they visit, the activities they enjoy at home, and the people who are part of their daily life adventures. Some children are being raised by grandmothers, others are being raised in foster care. Some are being raised in a nuclear family. Some are being raised by older siblings, right? So again, create opportunities for dialogues, because all families tell a story. Look at this child. The Dramatic Play Center was a bakery, a panaderia, that had actually some other cultural bread that the teacher had asked families about. And then we connect everything into all the content areas so that children see themselves in math and science and social studies. Leaves. You know, there's a lot of family connection to leaves. We eat leaves, we play with leaves, we plant leaves, we buy them at the grocery store, or we buy them at the corner market. We use them for medicine, we use them for teas, right? All families are very, very different. So why should your classroom environment reflect and include languages and cultures of your children? It demonstrates respect for the home languages and cultures of children and their families. It allows for children and families to read the environment. Even when they don't speak English, they can make connections between English and their home language. It facilitates learning for families and children by building on their prior knowledge while helping them feel included. You want families to feel included. It creates a caring, equitable community of learners. It is challenging, right? When you have so many cultures and languages represented, but please do get to know the diverse families that you're working with. And then in here, I give you all those main points that we talk about, those warm greetings, that multimodal way of interacting. I've had children that speak Vietnamese. I don't speak Vietnamese. I've had children that speak Japanese. I don't speak Japanese. And so many languages, right? But again, as the good early childhood teacher, we're multimodal. We use pictures. We use our face, our hands, our expression, our voice intonations, right? Just different ways. Just remember to demonstrate respect for diversity by all. So your exit ticket. As a result of what you learned today, what is one practice you will implement or prioritize to engage cultural and linguistic diverse families in your school or your center? So go ahead and include that as your exit ticket. And I know that we talked about a lot of information today.